Delighted to be interviewing Mark Montgomery today, who is an expert on all things cyber and all things related to Taiwan. And with an election coming up in Taiwan on Saturday to decide the presidency, I think this is potentially a really important conversation. Mark, thank you very much for joining me. Taiwan is such a vibrant, effective democracy. What are your expectations for Saturday?
Well, thank you for having me, and you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the beauty of Taiwan. It's a vibrant democracy, with a strong economy, and a history now of nearly 40 years of elections. There will be raucous elections. It's going to be very close, but most importantly, there'll be one person, one vote, and a fair election achieved and reported out within 24 to 48 hours. So I'm very excited about this opportunity, and I think that's an important thing to remind ourselves and contrast it with the Chinese Communist Party, who certainly shares none of those traits in terms of democracy or freedom of expression.
Indeed not. They don't believe in elections in communist China, whereas, as you rightly say, Taiwan's now had them for decades. But this time there are three parties. Which of the three do you think is most likely to win, and which can you categorize as most independent, pro-American, as opposed to most sort of status quo and pro-mainland China?
So, it will be close. I do think the current ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, of President Tsai, her vice president is running for president. That's Lai. And I do believe Lai will win the presidency. He's polling about 38% right now in a three-way race. Second right now is the Kuomintang, the KMT. They're the party that historically came over with Chiang Kai-shek, ran a military authority for 40 years, and then beginning in 1980 began to run, just after 1980 began to run elections. I think the KMT will come second. They're trailing by about 5 points in the polls. And then third will be the Taiwan People's Party, and they'll come in third, about 25%. So I think the DPP will win the presidency with President Lai, for the next 4 years. What's interesting is I think their legislature will end up being, no one will achieve a majority, and it is highly likely that the two opposition parties, the KMT and the TPP, will be in a position to form a ruling majority in the legislature. So we could have split government, which has happened in the past in Taiwan. Is not the current condition. The DPP controls everything right now. So I'm expecting DPP to win the presidency, and probably a split in the legislative majority for the opposition. Although that second prediction's a little less sure.
And what effect do you think this will have on relations with mainland China? Because historically the DPP was the most strongly in favour of independence, and the KMT was most strongly in favour of the status quo. If the DPP wins the presidency but doesn't have a majority, does that make relations with China a little bit easier? Does it make Taiwan more willing to go along with China?
That's a great point. And you described the historical positions of the DPP and the KMT perfectly. And I think what's happened over the last 8 to 10 years is that both of them have moved a little bit more towards each other. What I mean by that is you will not find the DPP saying the word independence out loud anymore. And in fact, through the whole presidential campaign, Lai has never said that. When in the past, 8 years ago, he would say that. So first, they've moved a little bit more towards. They certainly have no intention on reunification. They want to create the conditions so that can never be forced on them. But the DPP is moved a little bit that way. Conversely, the KMT has also moved away, from being too too concerned about infuriating China, to a little bit more recognizing that the youth of Taiwan do not see themselves as Chinese, and therefore don't vote for anyone that would sound like they're towards more of a reconciliation. So you see less of that from the KMT. So what that means is, in the end, the results are less, I think, less sharp and less impactful. But there would be a difference. The DPP clearly has worked closely with the United States to push foreign military sales. The DPP has raised defense spending from about 1.6% of GDP on defense to about 2.4, 2.5% of GDP on defense. So those policies of the DPP might be softened by the KMT. And of course, to people like me, that's risk, because if you do not make these kind of investments in your defense, if you do not make clear, your relationship with the United States and your desire for that, you don't send a strong deterrence message to China. So I think it's more in the messaging that's important in this election. That the DPP winning is a message that that Taiwan still feels its future is with the United States and the West and democracy, and no opportunity for being reincorporated into China.